He lived alone by choice, far from the noise and cruelty of men, until three frightened girls showed up, and behind them, an army rode with fire in their eyes. In that moment, the man they called a loner became something else entirely, a shield no one saw coming. The wind howls through the pines, scraping like claws against the old wood of Thorncale's cabin. Inside, it's silent, but not peaceful. Thorn moves slow, deliberate, every step echoing louder than it should on the creaking floor. He's lived alone out here for years, too long maybe, and his world isn't built for company. But now three girls sit on the fur rug in front of his fireplace, wrapped in old army blankets like ghosts in hiding. They didn't knock, just burst through the door as dusk bled into night. Barefoot, breathless, wild-eyed. He hadn't moved, just looked at them from his corner chair, a hand near the rifle that never leaves arm's reach. But something in their faces made him drop it. Now they huddle near the flames, trembling but silent, their limbs stick-thin, their braids loose and dirt-smeared. One's no older than 9. The eldest might be 15. None of them speak, but their eyes follow him, not with fear, with something older. Older than he expects from children. Thorn ladles stew into tin bowls, sets them on the floor near the hearth without a word. The girls don't move at first. Then slowly, the middle one reaches out. She tastes it like an animal might, testing for poison maybe. Then all three eat like they haven't in days. He watches them from his chair, arms crossed, doesn't speak, doesn't blink. His cabin is Spartan, no decorations, no softness, just stone, iron, and the smell of pine smoke. Tools hung neat on the walls, books in a crooked pile, a rifle oiled and ready, resting by the window. Thorncale is a man no one visits, the kind of man townsfolk warn their children about. Not because he's cruel, but because he's unknown. And unknown things frighten small towns. But these girls, they came to him, ran through the dark, across miles of rough country, and chose his door. Why? The eldest finishes her stew first, wipes her mouth with the back of her hand, stares into the fire. Her voice, when it finally comes, is dry as ash. "They were gonna sell us," she says. No tears, no preamble, just the truth. Thorn's jaw tightens. She doesn't look at him. Just keep talking, voice flat. "3 white men, at the camp, took our brothers first, then us." The youngest makes a sound, half sob, half breath, and the middle girl pulls her close, wraps an arm around her like a shield. Thorn stands. "Move to the stove. Start slicing dried venison." He doesn't ask questions, doesn't say he's sorry, because he's not a preacher. He's not a lawman. He's not even sure he's good. But what he is, what he's always been, is someone who doesn't walk away. Not from this. Not now. Outside in the far-off hills, a coyote howls. Thorn listens to it for a long moment. Then he looks at the girls. "You'll sleep here tonight," he says, voice rough from disuse. "And tomorrow, we will find out who did this." He doesn't say more, because they don't need words. They need a wall between them and the men chasing them. And Thorncale? He's been a wall before. If this story pulls at your heart already, don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next might leave you breathless. The fire's down to embers when the storm finally breaks. Rain lashes the tin roof like it's trying to dig its way in. Thunder rolls low and distant, but the cabin stays still. Quiet. Inside, the girls sleep in a heap of blankets near the hearth. Their breathing soft but uneven, the kind that never sinks too deep. Thorn knows that kind of sleep, the kind you don't trust. He's awake, has been for hours, sitting in his chair by the window, a long coat draped over his shoulders like a cloak. One hand rests on his rifle, the other curls around a tin mug gone cold an hour ago. He's watching the woods, because something doesn't sit right. He's no stranger to bad men, no stranger to bad things. But the look in those girls' eyes, that wasn't just fear, that was final, like they'd seen the worst and were still falling through it. He shifts his gaze to the girl who spoke, tallest of the three, maybe 15. Her name, she'd said quietly, was Sani. The middle one is Melly, the youngest, Ada. He hasn't asked for more. They haven't offered. But now, as if sensing his eyes, Sonny stirs. Her face lifts from the blanket, hair sticking to her cheek, and she blinks into the dark cabin until she finds him. You're not going to send us back, are you? It's not a question. It's a test. Thorn doesn't move. You came here. She nods slowly. We didn't know where else to go. One of the old women, she said there was a man in the North Woods. Said he didn't talk much, but he helped when no one else would. Thorn grunts, leans forward. Does she have a name? Sandy shrugs. They called her Red Auntie. Lived past the bend in Crooked Ridge. Said you once walked into town with a bleeding soldier on your back and left before they could say thank you. Thorn's eyes narrow. Red Auntie. He remembers. She was kind, fierce, tended his wounds once long ago and didn't ask questions. He'd never gone back, but she had remembered him. Sandy pulls the blanket tighter. They caught her before we ran. Thorn's fingers tighten around the rifle. Outside, the wind changes. Not just the weather. Something else. Something older. He stands, grabs the lantern, lights it low. Then he opens a drawer beneath the stove and pulls out a worn leather pouch. Inside, a flint knife, a coil of rawhide, and something wrapped in deer hide. Sonny watches. You gonna fight them? Thorn doesn't answer. He unwraps the bundle. Inside is a necklace, a simple piece, iron and bone. Something he hasn't worn in years. He slips it over his head, lets it rest against his chest. You shouldn't have to run, he says finally. Not from them, not from anyone. Sonny nods once. Her eyes shimmer in the lantern light, but she doesn't cry. Melly stirs beside her, whispering something in their language. Sonny leans down to soothe her, and Thorn steps out onto the porch. The storm's calm now, just mist and wind. But he hears it, faint, distant, drums, not the rhythm of war, not yet, but close. Thorn doesn't look back. He listens for a long time. Behind him, Ada hums softly, rocking in place. It's a haunting tune, faint like a memory of something ancient, a child's lullaby. He freezes just for a moment, then steps back inside. He doesn't ask where she learned it. They know. They're coming. And Thorn Kale, long thought to be a ghost in these hills, finally whispers back, let them. Thorn didn't sleep. He sat just outside the cabin, wrapped in his old oilskin coat, rifle propped beside him. The storm had passed, leaving behind a soft mist and the cold smell of pine. The woods were silent, but not peacefully so. This was the kind of silence that preceded something. He'd felt it before, years ago, right before everything went wrong. Inside, the girls slept in a huddled knot near the hearth. The fire had burned down to coals, casting a dull glow across the floorboards. Sonny wasn't sleeping. She sat by the window watching him with the calm, unblinking stare of someone who'd seen too much and no longer flinched. That's when Thorn heard it. Soft at first, then unmistakable. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate. Not the sound of travelers or ranch hands. These were men who didn't want to be heard, and that made them dangerous. He stood, walked to the edge of the clearing, and knelt by a moss-covered stump. With practiced hands, he uncovered the hatch beneath it and pulled out a tin box. Inside, a revolver wrapped in red cloth, a strip of salted jerky, and the necklace he hadn't worn in years. Bone and iron, tribal. Given to him long ago by someone whose memory still burned like fire. He loaded the revolver, slung the rifle, and moved back toward the cabin. They're here, Sonny said before he opened the door. You sure? I know they're horses. He didn't ask how. Just nodded, doused the lantern, and locked the door behind him. In the dark, he moved with precision, checking latches, sliding the bolt on the back entrance, placing his spare revolver beneath the table. Then he was crouched by the girls. Melly stirred. He handed her a blade. You stay behind the table. If someone comes through the back, you don't wait. You cut. She nodded once, jaw tight. He turned to Ada, knelt, and said, Stay close to your sister. Don't move unless she does. Ada nodded too. Brave kids, all of them. Then the porch creaked. A shadow passed the window. Leather boots. A hand tried the door. Thorn fired. The rifle cracked through the cabin with a blinding flash. Then again, a scream followed, hooves scrambled. Something heavy thudded against the porch rail and didn't move again. Sonny moved quickly, peered through the crack in the door. Not miners. These are hired men. Thorne stepped onto the porch into the mist. The trees loomed. He raised his voice, slow and level. You came for girl, he called into the dark. You think you'll take them back? He chambered another round. You'll leave here in pieces. No answer came, but from somewhere high in the hills a drum began to beat. Low, rhythmic, closer than before. Thorne stood still, listening. They weren't alone out here anymore. By morning the forest was still again, but Thorne could feel it breathing. The man he'd dropped on the porch had been dragged away during the night. Blood streaks led off into the brush before vanishing like smoke. Whoever had come for the girls wasn't finished. They were regrouping, watching, deciding what to try next. But Thorne wasn't worried about them. He was thinking about the drums. They had stopped around dawn, just as the mist began to lift. Not fading, just gone, as if someone had reached into the earth and cut the sound off with a blade. Sonny sat on the porch now, watching the same tree line he had guarded through the night. Her face was unreadable, but her silence had weight. She knew something. They weren't following us, she said finally. They were following the drums. Thorne raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Instead, he walked to the edge of the clearing and knelt in the dirt. A line of hoofprints led toward the southern ridge. Not the scouts from last night. These were wider, heavier, dozens of them, maybe more. He stood slowly, his chest tightened, not from fear but from a memory, old and sharp, long buried. The sound reached them before the sight did. Branches parting, wind shifting, horses snorting. Thorne turned toward the trees just as the first rider appeared. A tall man cloaked in bone-white paint, eagle feathers braided into his hair. Behind him the woods broke open with movement, a line of warriors on horseback. 10, then 20, then more. Sonny stood, her breath caught in her throat. The lead rider dismounted and strode forward without hesitation, passing Thorne's old snares and traps as if he already knew where they were. His eyes never left Thorne's. When they finally stood face to face, neither man spoke. Then the rider pulled off his necklace, a woven band of hide and copper beads, and held it out. You saved my son, he said, years ago, under fire. Carry him across the river on your back. Thorne stared at the man. The years had changed him, but not his voice. Malachi, he said quietly. The chief nodded. You left before we could thank you. Disappeared into the trees. I wasn't looking for thanks, Thorne replied. No, Malachi said, but you've earned more than that. Sandy stepped forward, her voice trembling. He's my grandfather, she said, motioning toward Malachi. I didn't know if he was real. I told the others. I thought you were a ghost. Thorne looked down at the necklace still outstretched between them, then back up at Malachi. You rode all this way, he said. For me? Malachi shook his head. For them. For what was taken. But we owe you, Thorncale, and we do not forget our debts. Behind him the warriors waited in silence, mounted and still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Thorne looked past them, toward the hills. If they're coming, he said, they'd better come fast. News traveled faster than fire in a dry wind. By midday, the mining boss in Stone Hollow already knew the girls were alive, and worse, that they'd landed under the protection of the man his men had whispered about in half-drunk barrooms. The one they called the Ghost of the Northern Ridge, Thorncale, a name that stirred more discomfort than it should have. Colt Bannister, foreman of the Hollow's deepest shaft and enforcer of everything wicked beneath it, leaned against the porch rail of his office saloon, chewing on a matchstick and watching the dust swirl down Main Street. Investors were already asking questions about missing cargo, about interruptions. And now word of 3 runaways under the protection of that damn ghost in the woods. That wasn't just a problem. That was a crack in the foundation. If people started believing they could run, or worse, that someone would fight for them, then control was lost. And men like Colt only knew how to rule with fear. Around him, men stood quiet, waiting for orders. Paid guns, drifters, Some are just thugs with badges bought with cheap whiskey. But they listened when Colt spoke. "Sent 3 last night," Colt said, voice calm but flat. "One ain't coming back. Other 2 are scared half to death." He looked at a scarred man leaning against the post, one eye cloudy from an old wound. "You said Cale was dead." "He was," the man replied. "Or close enough. Ain't no one seen him in years." Colt spat. "Well, he's seeing us just fine. Got half the Blackwood tribe on his porch now, too." That got murmurs. A few men shifted their weight, like the name itself carried weight in their boots. "He's protecting them girls," Colt continued, "which means he's protecting the lie. And lies kill business." He turned, walked back inside, and opened a wooden case near his desk. Inside, hand-drawn maps, payment ledgers, and a yellowed page marked with tribal land boundaries. Most of it had been bought out or bullied away, but not all. If word got out that girls were being trafficked through his camp, the whole operation could unravel, especially if someone like Thorne started talking. Back at the cabin, the warriors had set up a perimeter with eerie speed. No noise, no shouted commands. Just movement, silent, practiced. Sentries on the ridge, scouts down by the creek. Smoke trails had been doused. Horses were watered and ready, but tethered deep in the trees. Sani watched them with awe. Even Thorne, hardened as he was, felt something settle in his bones as he walked among them. Malachi stood by the stream bed, kneeling beside a patch of mud. "Scouts came through last night," he said. 4, maybe 5. They stopped here. One circled your cabin." "I got 2, Thorne said. "One's bleeding." Malachi nodded. "They'll come again, but next time they'll come loud." Thorne looked up the ridge, eyes narrowing. "Then we'd better be ready." The next morning broke sharp and dry. No rain, no fog, just that hard, brittle silence before something shatters. Thorne stood near the barn, adjusting the last tripwire behind the brush line. His fingers moved fast, like they'd never forgotten this kind of work. Overhead, a hawk circled once, then vanished behind the treetops. The warriors had melted into the woods before sunrise. No fires, no visible camp. From the cabin, it looked like the forest had swallowed them whole. Only Thorne, the girls, and Malachi remained in plain view. It was a tactic, one meant to bait whoever was watching, and there was no doubt now. Someone was always watching. Sani kept looking out from the cabin's loft, her eyes trained on the southern trail. She hadn't said much since yesterday, but she didn't need to. When she spotted them, she didn't yell, just gave a short whistle and raised 2 fingers. Thorne stepped onto the porch and followed her gaze. Riders, 6 of them, maybe 7, winding up through the lower hills in a loose column. They weren't in a rush. They thought they had the upper hand. Dust kicked up behind their horses like smoke trails, bandanas around their necks, rifles slung casual, like they were just coming in for a conversation. Thorne didn't move. He leaned against the post, arms crossed, rifle close. Malachi stood beside him, arms folded, unreadable. The lead rider was tall, broad-shouldered, with a coat that flapped open to show 2 revolvers on his hips. He pulled up first, close enough to smell the cabin's chimney soot. His horse pawed at the ground. "You Kyle?" the man asked, voice too smooth to be trusted. Thorne nodded once. "I'm here to collect," the man continued. 3 runaways. Camp property." Thorne's stare didn't waver. "You're branding people now? Since when are girls' property?" The man chuckled. "Not my concern what they are. I just get paid to bring them back." "Well," Thorne said, "you're going to have to give your pay back." Behind the lead rider, the others shifted slightly, hands moving near belts, nervous tension rolling in like thunder. "I'd think real hard about what you're saying," the man warned. "You might think you're doing something noble, but you're going to get a lot of folks hurt." Thorne stepped down from the porch. His boots crunched in the dirt. "I've hurt worse men than you, and I didn't even charge for it." That's when the lead rider twitched, barely, but enough to give his intent away. Before he could clear his holster, Thorne's rifle was up. The first shot cracked like bone splitting. The rider fell sideways off his horse before the others even registered what happened. Then the woods exploded. From the trees, warriors moved fast, bows drawn, blades flashing. The ambush was sudden, precise. 2 more riders were down before they could return fire. One screamed as he fled into the brush, only to vanish under the weight of silence and pine needles. The last one dropped his weapon, raised his hands and backed away, eyes wide. Malachi stepped forward, calm and still. "Go," he said. "Tell them the ghost is no longer alone." By nightfall, the air had changed. Even the trees seemed to lean in, listening. The message had been delivered, clearly, brutally. Thorn didn't take pleasure in bloodshed, but he knew sometimes pain was the only language men like Colt Bannister understood. And now, somewhere back in Stone Hollow, that last rider was delivering his sermon of fear. Inside the cabin, the girls sat at the table, Ada clutching a wooden spoon she hadn't used to stir anything. Melly had started tending to the weapons Thorn laid out, wiping the blades, checking powder stores, counting rounds with a quiet discipline that would have surprised anyone who didn't know what she'd already seen. Sonny stood near the window, watching the dark like it might open up and swallow them all. Thorn moved through the room like a man in rhythm. No wasted steps. He'd cleared off the maps from the wall, replacing them with sketches of the terrain, escape routes, fallback zones. The cabin wasn't just a home anymore. It was a fortress, and it would need to be, because men like Colt didn't back down when bruised. They came back harder, louder, meaner. Malachi leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching. He hadn't said much since the ambush. He didn't need to. His warriors were still in the woods, posted in a silent circle around the clearing, a net with teeth. "I know Colt," Thorn said, eyes still scanning the maps. "He'll come himself next time, probably with 20 or 30 men. Guns, maybe dynamite. He'll want to level this place, make an example out of it." Malachi nodded. "We will meet them on the ridge. High ground favors us." Thorn tapped the southern trail with a piece of charcoal. "Too exposed. If they cut the tree line, we lose sight." "Then we make them come through the wash," Malachi replied. "Narrow, rocky, can't flank in numbers." Thorn considered it, then nodded. "Good." Sandy turned from the window. "You said he'll come for us, but it's not just us now, is it?" "No," Thorn said. "It's about what you represent. Proof that his little empire can crack." She swallowed hard, then reached for a bow resting by the door. It was Malachi's, but she moved like it belonged in her hands. She pulled the string back, tested the tension, and nodded with quiet certainty. Thorn raised an eyebrow. "My father taught me," she said, "before they took him." That was all she said, but it was enough. Out near the ridge, smoke began to rise. Thin columns dark against the fading light. Signals, movements, preparations. Back in Stone Hollow, Colt Bannister was gathering his men. He wasn't bringing scouts this time. He was bringing a war party. And up on the ridge where the pines whispered to each other like nervous old men, Thorn Cale waited with his back to the past and a rifle laid across his knees. Dawn crept over the ridgeline in shades of iron and ember. The forest was quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the pause before a fight, the breath before the scream. Thorn stood on the cabin's roof, glassing the southern trail through an old spyglass that had seen its share of wars. The trail was empty for now, but that wouldn't last. He could feel it. Men like Colt didn't lick wounds. They bit back. Below, the clearing buzzed with movement. Malachi's warriors had returned just before first light, more of them this time. Riders, runners, scouts with eyes like hawks, over 50 strong. They came in waves of silence, emerging from the woods as if grown there. Bows strung, blades cleaned, rifles slung on leather straps. These weren't hired guns or drunken bravos. They were defenders of a bloodline, warriors born from generations of resistance. And this time, they rode for more than memory. Thorn came down from the roof and found Malachi near the corral, where horses drank from troughs rimmed in frost. The chief nodded as Thorn approached, then pointed toward the hills. "They've gathered," Malachi said. 3 ridges out. 20, maybe 30. Fire pits. No attempt to hide. "He wants us to see him coming," Thorn replied. "Wants to scare us into running." "Will you run?" Thorn looked up the hill where Sani practiced drawing her bow beside a young warrior no older than she was. Melly stacked firewood with a rhythm that echoed discipline, not fear. Ada sat beside the old hound Thorn never named, humming softly as she sharpened a stick with childlike focus. He turned back to Malachi. No, Thorn said. Not this time. They spent the rest of the morning fortifying the cabin's perimeter. Old traps were reset, trenches disguised beneath leaves. Entry points were marked, angles calculated. The wash was the kill zone. Narrow, rocky, no room for numbers. Just the kind of place Thorn liked to fight. The warriors would lie in wait, scattered like bones across the ridge. If Colt's men made it through, they'd meet the muzzle of Thorn's rifle in the edge of a 100-year grudge. As the sun climbed higher, Malachi approached with a gift. An old war shirt, dyed black, its seams stitched with beads and raven feathers. He held it out. My son wore this in his last battle. He would have wanted you to have it. Thorn took the shirt with reverence, running his fingers along the beadwork. He didn't say thank you. With Malachi, that wasn't needed. Later, when the shadows stretched long and the birds went quiet, a low rumble carried through the hills. Not thunder, hooves, many. Steady. Colt Bannister was coming, and he wasn't bringing warnings this time. From the ridge above the wash, Thorn shouldered his rifle and scanned the tree line one last time. They think they're hunting, he said under his breath, but they walk straight into a story they don't know how to end. The first shot rang out just after noon. It came from the far side of the wash, a sharp crack that scattered a flock of birds into the pale sky. Colt Bannister's men had reached the ridge, just as Thorn expected, riding with the arrogance of men convinced they were charging toward a quick and glorious victory. They moved in a loose formation, 30 men on horseback, rifles strapped to their backs, pistols swinging from belts like toys. Thorn watched through the scope of his rifle, hidden behind a thick screen of pine. He waited, breathing slow and shallow, while the wind curled around him. Across the wash, Malachi's warriors were buried in the trees, boughs drawn, bodies painted in streaks of ash and ochre. They moved only when the wind did. They were invisible. Colt rode near the front of the column, sitting tall in his saddle like a man who'd already carved his name into the land. He wore a long duster, black as tar, and carried a shotgun across his lap. Every so often he scanned the tree line, his jaw working, chewing something bitter. Thorn's voice came low and steady. Let them come in closer. Malachi nodded. The signal was passed from one warrior to the next, silent as breath. The riders didn't slow as they entered the wash. That was their mistake. Thorn squeezed the trigger. The lead rider folded off his horse without a sound, dust kicking up around his limp body. Before the others could react, a volley of arrows cut through the trees. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Chaos exploded. The warriors struck with precision. Arrows found throats, knees, and unguarded bellies. Thorn shifted position, picked off the ones who tried to break left. The ones who turned back found their exit blocked. Malachi had sent a second group to close the mouth of the canyon. They were boxed in. Colt's voice roared over the din. Hold the line! Fan out! But the men were panicked. They hadn't come to fight an army. They'd come to scare off a hermit and collect some runaway girls. Instead, they rode into a trap older than the soil beneath their boots. Thorn dropped another man who'd taken cover behind a fallen log. Smoke curled from his barrel, but his hand stayed steady. He moved like he was back in the war, fluid, unthinking, all instinct and rhythm. One of Colt's lieutenants broke away, firing blindly as he ran for higher ground. Sonny caught him in the shoulder with an arrow, and he tumbled backwards, screaming until he landed hard and didn't get up again. By the time the gunfire slowed, a third of Colt's men were down. Another third had thrown their weapons aside, hands raised, begging for mercy. The rest tried to flee. But the forest doesn't forget, and on this ridge, justice didn't wear a badge. It wore war paint and a rifle scope. The wash fell silent by late afternoon, stained with the echoes of gunfire and the cries of men who thought they owned the world. Smoke hung in the air like a veil, drifting lazily between the pines. The battle was over, but the ground still trembled with its memory. Thorn stood near the ridge's edge, rifle lowered, boots planted in the churned-up soil. His coat was signed at the hem, dust and blood streaking the sleeves, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes were locked on the trail below, where the last of Colt Bannister's men were being marched back toward the clearing. Disarmed, heads down, breathing like whipped dogs. Malachi's warriors moved through the trees like ghosts, collecting dropped weapons, binding wounds, tending to their own. They had taken losses, but not many. They hadn't just fought harder. They'd fought smarter. It wasn't a slaughter. It was a statement. Colt himself had survived, dragged from beneath his horse after it was shot out from under him. He'd broken his leg in the fall, maybe a few ribs too, and now he sat slumped against a rock, hands tied, face twisted with pain and fury. He glared at Thorne as the older man approached, but there was something else behind the hate now. Confusion. Disbelief. "You're just a damned recluse," Colt spat. "You ain't nobody." Thorne crouched in front of him, his voice quiet, like a teacher correcting a child. "I was nobody when it suited me. That's the difference between us." Colt tried to straighten, wince curling his face. "You think this means anything? There'll be more. Bigger men than me. You can't stop it." Thorne nodded slowly. "There's always more, but not here. Not anymore." He stood, turned his back, and walked away, leaving Colt stewing in the dust. Justice didn't need another speech. The forest had already spoken. In the clearing, the girls stood among the warriors. Sani had her bow slung across her shoulder, face smudged but calm. Melly helped one of the injured wrap a wound. Ada sat cross-legged, feeding the old hound scraps of smoked meat, humming the same tune she had before the fight. None of them looked afraid anymore. Malachi joined Thorne near the edge of the clearing. The two men stood in silence for a long while, watching as the sun dipped low and turned the blood-streaked grass to gold. "They'll talk about this," Malachi said finally. "About the ghost man in the woods." "Let them," Thorne replied. "Sometimes legends are the only thing cowards respect." Malachi chuckled softly, then placed a hand on Thorne's shoulder. "You stood when it mattered. That makes you more than a ghost." Thorne didn't answer. He didn't need to. He looked out over the trail, the trees, the place he'd once thought was meant for dying quietly. And for the first time in years, he felt something loose inside him, like a bone finally set right.